what I wanted to do today in exchange for your time, for coming here, I wanted to share some learnings in terms of what it's like to create a new category in a SaaS business. It's something that I learned a lot of things the hard way, building Cuba for the last 9 years. And this is almost a letter to myself that I would want to read 10 years ago before I set up Cuba. So just a little bit of context on my background before I go into my 5 lessons. First of all, I was always wanted to found a business, always wanted to create products, and I started trying to do that from a very young age, sort of at the age of about 12. I was filing a patent for something to cool cars down, but not getting the money to actually do the patent from my parents. They didn't really understand what I was up to. But then I was trying to build all sorts of businesses, from school newspapers to selling crisps and Cokes, all the way through to setting up a company that I tried to sell to Blockbuster Video. And I kind of was trying to build these businesses, trying to figure it all out. There was very little ecosystem. There was very little infrastructure in the UK, despite the accent. I've grown up here. And so what we've got today is so exciting because there's such an infrastructure. There's so much to learn from. And communities like SaaStock are phenomenal in what they can do if you're building a SaaS business. And I do highly recommend attending their event. It's one of the highest quality events I've ever been to in this space. And so, the first time I actually found a community that helped me figure out how to build a business was actually applying for a job at Google. I got a job in 2005 after finishing university. I didn't sell my company to Blockbuster Video. They thought they had the secret. They didn't. And I think they should have bought my product because it would help them compete with Netflix in some way. But really, the 5 years I had at Google was just incredible. It was a whirlwind experience of understanding how to build great product, how to understand the size of markets, how to know what real scale is, how to scale to billions and billions of people, of data points, and it was an eye-opening experience. And it created a very entrepreneurial environment. You could really build your own job and what you wanted to do next there. And so it was a great launch pad to start building a company of my own. And I think when I went to launch Qubit with my 3 co-founders from Google, we made a bunch of really obvious mistakes, and this is really what I wanted to share today, because I think these things can help you avoid some of the pains that we've gone through in the journey of building this business. But really what the sort of essence of it all came down to was starting a business where you have sort of blind ambition. You just want to build something and you want to make it big and successful, and you really want to replicate some of the feelings of success you had at Google is actually quite a dangerous thing because it's not easy to replicate the successes of Google. And I think we tie ourselves often to the ambition that we can absolutely be building. We sort of compare ourselves to the biggest and most successful companies in the market, and that can be a very unhealthy and difficult passage to be taking. So, the first lesson here is really around how do you understand the type of solution you're trying to provide to the world. And one of the most important distinctions that we had to go through was, are you building a new category, or are you trying to build into an existing category? Like, it's a very important to say. Airbnb is a new category. They had to completely explain to the world what Airbnb was. It was a very complex problem. Salesforce was a new category. They had to explain what cloud CRM was. It was a complete departure from anything that that had existed already. Google, for instance, was, I think, at the 36th search engine. This was just a 10 times better solution than any other search engine. So, it's a really important distinction. Are you building a new category? Well, if you're building a new category, it needs to be 10 times better than the existing category leader. And if you're not building a new category, then you have to be able to explain what your product and category is. And this is a really hard thing to relate to the market. And it's very easy. There's a great tweet I was reading today. It's very easy to jump on this local maxima. This is Brian, the CEO of Qualtrics, talking about this. It's very easy to jump onto this local maxima when you're building a new category. You think you've got this you're getting sales, you're getting sort of momentum on something, but it isn't the thing that you really wanted to do, but you're going to kind of follow it, you can then miss the global maxima. You can miss the really big opportunity. And it's very important you almost consciously understand, I'm building a category, and I'm going to stay true to our mission and direction that we should be taking this product and business in. And so, this is not a hard thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. But, what we're finding in enterprise software as a service is that the Excel era is coming to an end. The idea that enterprise software can be kind of like, yeah, we'll cobble it together, and here you go. It's sort of the UI is not great, but it solves all these problems. That is truly coming to an end. This notion of why do I feel so powerful at home but so incapable of doing my job at work is because we have had fantastic innovation and product design in consumer products, but we've had terrible innovation or we've had great innovation but terrible product design in enterprise products. But this is truly coming to an end. Being able to design the right product is in having customers love that product, users love that product is so critical. So I'm going to talk more on that. It's probably one of the most important steps in building an enterprise software company, because it's very easy to fall into the trap. And I'll talk about the trap. So second lesson. So this is an important one because it's a very early stage genesis of the business that you're creating. And out of interest, how many people here are founders? Founders. And how many people are early employees of companies that are okay? And then how many are, and then you're all in enterprise software as a service? Anybody, consumer businesses, consumer? Yeah, got a few consumer, okay. And then anybody building on-prem? Good. Just checking. And so, it's glad we got everybody in the right room. So the genesis of a business is, there's almost like a ticking clock in terms of how long you get to get the genesis right. And the genesis is what I wish I had gone back and done. Almost the single most important thing I would have gone back and done was build out a proper vision, ambition, values, and purpose, doctrine. Actually write it down. And I think that when I was founding the business, we felt like the founders were embodying that. And we felt we had that, and we would pass it on by word to the next employees we hired. And we would just keep passing on our values and our vision and our ambition and our purpose. And what you often get is when you're interviewing candidates, you're just sort of, they're not Cuba. They're not Cuba people. And in that's like, well, what does that mean? I mean, you haven't actually written that down. And I thought it was just too cheesy, in a sense, to write this down. And I wish I had written it down all those years, because I think that I've heard founder after founder who's gone through the same pain I've gone through do that. They've actually written it down and they've codified their values. And I'm going to reiterate this because I think these are the four most important things. The vision is critical because that keeps your North Star to where you should be building your product, your market, your business. Your ambition is really how big do you want to be? How are you going to be seen in the world? What's the big goal you're trying to achieve? The scale that you want to reach as a business. Your values are the sort of 5 ways that you would bottle up all the people in your company, what they, their behaviors, things like that. And then your purpose is really, or you could call it mission. Purpose and mission are interchangeable. But your purpose is really your, why do you exist? I mean, literally, if the world were to remove you, what would replace it? And if the answer is nothing, then that's an alarming thing. And it's a really important thing to ask yourselves, your founding teams, your early employees. If the world were to replace us, if we were to disappear, what would replace us? And the more you can align all of those things together, that the purpose of your business is an important purpose to the world, you'll hire higher quality people. If you give them vision, you'll build the right thing. If you have ambition, you'll go for the big goals. And then if you can every year define your strategy for that year. And we have developed all these things, and we've created a 5-pillar strategy. Every year, there's 5 pillars to the strategy. Each pillar represents one of the big outcomes we want to achieve, and there's owners against that. And all these things sound like bureaucracy, and I'm the least bureaucratic. I hate rules, I hate bureaucracy, I hate all these things. They're so critical to do. I mean, it's 10-year self, 10-year, writing a letter to my 10 years person 10 years ago is really, I wish we got this, because I think we did it, retrofitted it and everything. And then, when you walk around your business, it's like, why do I not feel like you're part of our mission? It's because you hired people that were, not against the principles here. So it's so important. And every year you build up that you haven't done this, it's going to be more painful to retrofit it. But even if you haven't done it, do it. Even if you are going to retrofit it, do it. So, third lesson, don't listen to all your customers. And this is a really complex one. And I'm going to talk about a distinction between customers and users. And I'm sure a couple of you in here really understand that distinction already. But in enterprise software as a service, the bigger your product, the bigger your platform, let's say, the more it costs to buy your technology, the bigger the mistakes you're going to end up making. Because what you're doing here is you're going to find that you get a couple of brands that give you these big, big, big checks. And we had in our first year, we generated $1 million in our first year. Very few companies start off making $1 million. We generated, I think we generated $2.5–3 million in our second year. It was just really crazy. We were signing deals that were, in some cases, $1 to $2 million per year, tech license. It was enormous contracts, and it feels so good. It feels so exciting to sign deals like that and to find that there's a fit to what you do. But the reality is, these businesses that buy your product at that price are going to take you so far off your roadmap you cannot even imagine. And you're already contending with forces like the engineering team wanting to build their own stuff, the biggest customers wanting to do this very specific project, the sales team wanting to sell everything they can possibly sell. So you get all these competing forces, and it's extremely painful. But I can tell you, the loudest voice in the room is the customer paying you, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And the issue here is, even more exacerbated by signing multi-year contracts. So I've seen really good quality businesses sign, on average, 4-year deals. And then, what happened after 4 years is they realized they'd made a load of mistakes in that period of time. And then they ended up having to really solve painful problems. And so the higher frequency your learning cycles are, the better you're going to be. And I mean, consumer products have this naturally. If you're a consumer product, you have customers constantly validating whether your product is good or not. They're constantly feeding back to you. They're constantly complaining. They're constantly giving you a check on what you're building. In enterprise software as a service, we don't have those checks as easily. And we really, the more you can build the checks in, even if they're artificial, even if your business does need to cater for multi-year deals, you should definitely make sure those checks are in place to validate whether you're going the right direction. And you have to resist the big deals. And one is okay, a year potentially, but resist doing multiple big deals, because then it gets really, really complicated. One of the most effective things we did to really understand our business about 5 or 6 years into it is to do a customer segmentation. And so we were able to, first of all, define the ideal customer. That came out of understanding all the segments of our customers. So we looked at lifetime value, we looked at usage of the product, we looked at all sorts of other metrics, and we were able to create essentially a matrix that helped us define what the ideal customer was for Qubit. And we figured out the size of business, the way they'd use it, the industries they're in, and we went from a company selling to every customer, every industry, every size, and we ended up about 3 or 4 years ago verticalizing. We created 6 industries that we serve: luxury, fashion, health and beauty, airlines, travel, and gaming. We focused on those 6. We focused on businesses that do about $250 million in online revenue. And we became the industry leader in many of those verticals as a result of that focus. And so it's a very, very important step to take. And we found a lot of common patterns with these types of customers. And we saw that they had certain types of teams, that we knew that we'd use certain parts of the product. And it just gave us a whole new type of focus, and that paid off massively. And I remember at Google, when I was at Google in 2006, we were looking at a verticalization strategy as well. And Google was doing the same thing, 2006. The sales team were selling to every brand, every size. Salespeople had like 1,000 to 2,000 account patches that they would sell to, and they went to having 30 to 50 accounts. So you went from 1,500 to 30 to 50 accounts. And everybody complained, and it was a disaster, and everybody was upset. But in the end, everybody started to do much, much better. So when you tell your sales team you're only going to have a patch of 10 accounts, 20 accounts, and you've had an unlimited patch, you'll be enormous pain and complaining. But I've never not seen it work. I've never not seen that end up creating a more successful strategy. So lesson number 4, build for users, not companies. And I'm sure a lot of you, you've experienced this, you know this. This is a well-documented and well-written about topic today. But if you don't really get the nuance between users and customers, then it's critical you do that. There's some incredible thinking and product design thinking here that is very important. But users at the end of the day are the ones who use your product, will buy your product, and will renew your product. And again, software as a service or enterprise, pre-software as a service, enterprise used to be you'd sell the big deal into the senior role, the VP, the CTO, and you would end up with a large deal, and then everybody would be forced to work with that product for a few years. That's going away now. In the time we've been selling our technology, we've seen the market go from usually like 1 to 2 decision makers to 5, 6, 10 decision makers. Any one of these decision makers can veto your sale. And so being able to groundswell through users is such a more effective approach in terms of reducing the risk of not getting the deal. And you see the biggest software as a service companies are really effective at that. Slack. Who uses Slack? A lot of you, exactly. So Slack is a phenomenal example of user-centric design that focused on the mechanics of usage to understand how quickly that product would grow through an organization. And they actually figured out that 2,000 messages in a 5-person team was the magical critical mass for that succeeding. So if 2,000 messages were sent in that group of at least 5, then Slack knew that account would be successful and it would grow across the organization. And so that's the sort of user-centric metrics to complement your design that you need to be thinking, whatever your product is. It's absolutely, if your users are developers, if your users are marketers, if your users are HR, whatever, you must think in user-centric design. Prototyping, validating the prototypes before you write code. Engineers want to write code. Let the engineers be part of the prototyping and design process. This is such an effective method to building the right product. And it feels uncomfortable. Engineers don't like when they're not writing code. But if they're part of the process of designing it, they'll build the right product. You'll get there. You'll get to your goal faster. Even if you feel like you're writing less lines of code and your velocity is going down, you'll get to the outcome you need to much faster. And that was a huge turning point for us. And then really my 5th lesson is just check yourself. It's so important to check in with yourself and the people in your business. I heard this quote the other day that most founders want to build products, and the burden of having to build products is they have to hire and manage people. And I definitely connected with that because for me, I've always been product system, let's build something that scales. We scaled Cuba to 800 million users, are impacted by our personalization technology. And it's something that I've always thought about that. We must get to that point. But in reality, it's the people, and it's how you organize the system of people in your business that's going to make it a success or not. And so I really underestimated the importance of a management team and of a leadership team. And it's something that I've worked on over the years of building into the business. And you're going to find that making those, as leaders, making those investments in management teams and leadership teams is so critical. because it's how you carry the business. And as a founder or CEO or founder, C-level founder within your business, you can really overlook this one, and getting ahead of it is critical. And I think that what you'll find is that it's critical when the times get hard, because the leadership team and the founder and the management team will take the burden off you as an individual. And the sort of burden that you get as a founder, CEO, leader building a business is that you'll be completely unprepared for times when the employee morale, dissatisfied customers, demanding investors can have on you as an individual. I mean, if you think you're going into running your own business to be your own boss, think again, like for real. You'll never have more bosses. You'll never have more of a burden on you. I mean, my time at Google was glorious in terms of the lack of burden I had in my life. And so I really think that it's a tough and lonely thing, and ultimately, ultimately you really need to be thinking about how you build the people around you to do that. And you will also find that your management team that you have today is not the management team that you'll necessarily have tomorrow. You will need to upgrade and change the team over time. This is how the reality of it works. And being honest and frank with people on that, even up front about that, is so important, because I think you must evolve the team with with where you are in the business and the stage of the business. And the more upfront and honest you can be about that, the better. I really think that the emotional burden, I think it's now becoming a lot more open about mental health, and I think it's getting that out in the open, about mental health, anxiety, depression. These things are all critical. I mean, I've had times where I was practically like fainting in fundraising meetings, going between multiple VCs, getting no's all over the place, and really thinking, I can't do this. I can't breathe. I can't. It's so hard to do some of these things, and you feel like you can't show any weakness to anyone. And I wish I had known that you can be a little bit more of a person, of a reality, and really sort of, I think it's a lot healthier how that's kind of evolving now. So bring that into the open, and you'll create a lot more of a healthy organization. I think really finally, some of the best advisors I got were actually books and self-learning. There were some really pivotal moments in developing a change in, it's going back to creating a category. I think creating a new category is it's so hard. And out of interest, who's creating a new category in the room? Yeah, all right, yeah, well, it's crazy to create a new category. It's so hard. There's so long you're trying to explain to people what you're doing. And, I read some great books on how to think about that. And it was, Innovator's Dilemma, Clayton Christensen, helps you understand the evolution of tech cycles and where you are. The Hype Cycle, another really effective book. Crossing the Chasm, another really critical book. And then 7 Powers by Hamilton Helmer. And these books not only were such important guides for how we should build the business, build our product, understand our market. I made everybody read them, everybody in the team read them, and that created a pool of knowledge. And then I reached out and worked with half these authors. So authors are actually incredibly open to working with companies. Jimmy Allen is the other one, Jimmy Allen from Founders Mentality. 50% of these people I've talked about, I worked with these people. We continue to work with them. And they love to see their theories put into practice in your businesses. And it's probably one of the most effective steps we've ever taken in terms of thinking through a lot of things. So I'm going to, am I in time? Yeah, I'm on time, okay. I'm going to finish there. I think my sort of parting words here are that, even though you have 100 bosses effectively, I think that's the average feeling I have above me is 100 bosses. Even though you have 100 bosses, I wouldn't do it any other way. I would literally wouldn't do it another way. I love the opportunity to call the shots. I love the opportunity to build and have impact on the world and to employ people and work with great people, and it's really something that's super exciting. So, you know, I highly recommend it if you really are able to, you know, sort of think through some of these. I hope I've helped you reduce some burden in making decisions. And I guess at this point, I say thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here. Obviously, great work by SaaStock team and everything they've done to support the SaaS community. But then also, we've been very happy to be working with them. I know when I first came into contact with SaaStock, I suppose a few years ago, when they just started going, it was a wonderful chat with Alex, and I remember him kind of talking about like, hey, here's the vision, and it was like loud in the background, and he was at a conference, and I was like, you know, the passion that this guy has and the vision that he has for how he wants to develop and create an ecosystem really meshed well with a lot of our own belief system. So for us, it just made a whole lot of sense to figure out how do we work together. So just a little bit about myself. So I've been at Google nearly 4 years. Prior to that, worked at Rackspace, joined them when they were already a scale-up, but it afforded me the opportunity to do a lot of cool things, because by the time I left, they had like nearly 7,700 employees, so it allowed me to get into all sorts of trouble and do things that I probably had no business doing, like building and launching from scratch a Latin American business unit that eventually became $50 million a year business. But just, yeah, the learning, right, and that opportunity to grow. So my team and what I'm ultimately responsible for is leading all our cloud startup ecosystem work for all of Europe. So most of what we do, I'd say, is firmly wrapped around technical enablement. And if there's anything that we've learned, which in the unique position that I'm afforded to be in, and to be honest, quite privileged, is that get the opportunity to talk to founders every day. Probably talk to somewhere in the neighborhood of 200, 230 or so per quarter, and you start to develop some muscle memory around kind of trends and what's working, what's not. And you know, through that, if there's one thing that holds true, it's ultimately when it comes to building the product, certainly building something that people want. And you know, Graham touched on something super important, which is, you know, build for users and not for companies. And I can really connect with that from kind of my own failings of trying to build things to just working with a lot of founders. And that's something that I think is tremendously important, and for people almost as they're thinking about their own kind of North Star and where they want to go to. So it can also help to serve as a bit of a compass, because you know, we do live in a world where there's a lot of hype, and with that hype comes a bit of confusion. And it's easy to get kind of distracted. So I love this tweet because to me, it really rings true and speaks so much to me. But, you know, the reality is that, you know, ultimately, it's still kind of down to some of the fundamentals, which is asking the question, which is, what problem am I trying to solve, right? And then from there, you know, our team, we really try and get kind of set in motion around, well, what are the things that we can do to help people on their journey? The journey is going to be difficult regardless of what happens. So if there are things that we can do to aid people, whether it's, you know, earlier in the journey and building an MVP to how to scale things from an infrastructure perspective, or building in more capabilities to extract insights, then we certainly want to be able to do that. So, you know, how many people have gone down the rabbit hole of using a tool, whether it was a day, a week, month, God forbid, longer than that, only to find out that it wasn't the right tool for the right job? It's all right, you don't have to out yourself. I already know because you're shaking your heads. But you know, that's what we want to try and be able to focus on. We want to try and allow people to focus on their users. We want to allow people to try and focus on, ultimately, what's going to delight those users so they don't have to focus on managing global infrastructure. So ultimately, be able to ship, write code. So that's where we tend to put the majority of our time in, and again, a lot of that comes through the form of technical enablement, whether architecture and design sessions, or just ultimately trying to figure out how do we help people as they're running into different roadblocks as they're building out even their product roadmaps, certainly from a technical capability standpoint. And I think the magic of all that happens with, us just trying to work closely together with some of the startups, and then trying to figure out, because they all, in the end, have global ambitions. And we want to try and help people as they're on that journey. And kind of the global ambitions is actually a good segue into kind of the fireside chat, because from a kind of thematic standpoint, we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of that journey of what's it like going from the UK to really going truly international in the US as well. So I'm going to invite Graham back up here, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So, Graham, obviously, as being UK based and started a company, what was some of that early on decision making around how ultimately you're going to take Qubit international?
I think one of the hardest things was, first of all, if you're a SaaS company, it's pretty hard to just be a SaaS company in the UK and just in the UK. I think you can be a fintech, or you can be a e-commerce business, and the UK can be a great and huge market on its own for a long time. If you're a SaaS company in America, you can go to being just pre-IPO and have a large enough market just in the US. So I think the UK, I think you're almost sort of somewhat threatened by the fact that you have to do it. If you want to, who feels that they have to do it? Yeah, exactly. You have to do it. And so that kind of that sort of Damocles kind of sitting over you is quite terrifying. And then all your Series A investors, all your Series B investors will ask about how's it going with international. They'll straight away be pushing you to be solving that. So there's a lot of pressure to do it. And when you do it is so critical to whether you're successful or not. And the simplest test is, have you got real product market fit? Have you got repeatability in what you're selling, what you're marketing? Because if you go international, if you go into the US without repeatability, you'll get crushed. I mean, it's a tough market, highly competitive, and it's very painful.
And speaking of product market fit, did you feel that, obviously you felt that when you went international into the US in particular, that you had achieved product market fit, but was there any notion of, do we have to try and redo that all over again within the US?
Yeah. I think in hindsight, when we went into the US, I don't think we had product market fit. I think we felt like we did. We kind of fooled ourselves into it. I think if there's a way to objectively determine if you have product market fit, you got to be metrics driven. It's got to be users are using the product in a certain way. They're not heavily relying on any sort of services component. I think that's one of the sort of black magic tricks with SaaS is you go into having a services team that kind of make up for the gaps on the product, and we basically went in early. Probably we thought, we'll tailor it for the U.S. market, and we started off with probably not having enough product market fit in the first place.
And earlier in your talk, you talked a little about kind of almost like a letter that you would have written to yourself 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So kind of knowing that, what would you say, maybe not to select all the things that you mentioned, but of some of the common pitfalls that you found in going to the U.S.?
Yeah, so I think, some of my number one recommendation, even if you've gone into the U.S. without great product market fit yet, even if you're still working it out, the worst thing you can do is then create a distributed team. So if you are headquartered in the UK, building product market fit, building the culture, building the business, and then you go into America and you're like, well, we'll have an East Coast and a West Coast team, and then we'll have salespeople dotted around, because US love to work from home. It's a home office, and that's a big thing in America. And you get a lot of like great sales guys with a home office, and all of a sudden they don't know shit about your product, and so you end up with not only building product market fit, but you're also like a sales team that's all over the place. And I think I made a lot of mistakes on the first entrance into the US, because we went for a more distributed team, and we went for so I think number one, everybody's in the same location, everybody's coming into the office every day, and you're one unit figuring it out. And if you have to get on a plane to San Francisco or LA and you're based in New York, then that's worth it. Paying those travel expenses worth it, because you create a unit, and that unit goes back to having an understanding of the vision, the purpose, the ambition, the values, the strategy, and it's all a unit. And I think that's like number one. Like that will really help you a long way. And I think my other recommendation is, if you are a UK headquartered company or a French headquartered company, a Paris headquartered company, having a team in West Coast is really tough. If your whole team is West Coast, then you're going to really end up with a, very short overlap each day compared to East Coast team. So the only way it works is you have to have the founder CEO there in the West Coast. You have to move the headquarters of the company almost.
Quite interesting, especially in a day and age when people are trying to figure out how do you maintain company culture, especially when you start kind of figuring out, how to divide up those responsibilities.
Yeah.
How did you find kind of trying to find, or keep the identity of Qubit when you're going through that process?
Well, I mean, I felt like there was two versions of Qubit. There was Qubit USA and Qubit UK. There was two evolving cultures that had come out of it.
It's an interesting A/B test.
I know. We literally A/B tested our culture, and there were definitely qualities about the US Qubit team that were greater than the UK, and there were qualities about the UK that were better than the US. And what we did is we found a lot of willing employees to want to make the move over, but they kind of took their parts of the culture over. And again, it was because we didn't have the vision, mission, or the vision, purpose, ambition, values codified. I think if you can codify those, then it works really well. I mean, companies that have done this really well, like Algolia, Paris headquartered, they're now San Francisco, really, really successful at creating a global company. It's a French company, but everybody has to speak English, and they've codified a lot of their culture, and it's worked very successfully on an international basis as a result of that. And since then, we've actually taken Qubit just to New York. It's just New York, London, Paris are our three main offices, and that's helped a heck of a lot to do it like that.
So I suppose one could say scientific method would say change one variable at a time. A hell of a lot harder to do when you're running a startup. So kind of knowing that, I'm sure you can recall many times where you had all sorts of changes going at once. Is there any one that kind of stands out to you that maybe you would have perhaps done a bit differently?
I think the biggest change I've seen is moving to user-centric design. I think what we did is we identified ideal customer, we knew our economic buyer, and we sold to an economic buyer at an ideal customer. And we did a lot of business that way. And then at the end of the day, the product that the company had to use was, not, it had sort of rough edges, I'd say. And that was very misleading, because we just closed this huge brand, and they love our solution, but then the users there would sort of be like, this is hard to use. And the complexity there, again, it's a very enterprise SaaS type scenario, is that you can do the deal based on your reference customers, the solution you provide, the outcomes you'll generate. You can sell high up in the organization because you drive Qubit will drive a business, 8 to 10% top line growth. So if you're doing $1 billion in revenue, we'll generate $100 million of additional revenue for you. So we'll have a big impact on your business. So those are kind of tick the box, big impact, sells to the top of the business, helps the business hit their goals. But if you have an engineering team that doesn't necessarily want to finish, they want to go into the next thing, the next big problem, we deal with very big data sets on top of Google Cloud. We love Google Cloud, just saying. We deal with very, very big data sets on top of Google Cloud. And engineers were like, we love process. We were doing 150,000 queries per second. But what about the front end? I don't give a shit about the front end. We're doing 150,000 queries per second. And we've written AI on that as well. And it's sort of, we kind of went down that innovation road on the product development. And then we were able to sell the big deals. And what happened in the middle, we didn't have the users looked after well enough. And so the last sort of 2 years has been changing our culture, engineering, product, culture, to be user-centric design. And that's probably been the single biggest shift I've seen.
So kind of a little bit on that note, I feel today a lot of people talk about customer success and varying degrees of what that means to them. But I suppose kind of how you saw it through your own eyes, what was it like trying to drive customer success globally?
Yeah.
And kind of how has that kind of been refactored to now?
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved and evolving. I think that, customer success plays who has customer success orgs? Yeah. Who has professional services orgs as well? Yeah. So, we have evolved. I always describe Qubit, we're in our third act of Qubit. And we have evolved from having professional services managing the relationship, the renewal, all of it, to then creating a sort of a hybrid different team to now creating separate customer success org and professional services orgs. It's really important to operate in that third state, I would recommend, because you need a separation of the delivery of what the customer is, sort of implementation and delivery, to the day-to-day health of the account. And it's so important to run. I mean, customer success is a formula. Like, you don't need to go and rewrite the rule book on customer success. There is a well-proven formula on how to do it, how to make contact, how to do QBRs, quarterly business reviews, how to just sort of manage the health and relationship of your customers. And I find a tendency a lot of startup founders like to do is reinvent things. And again, like one of my biggest learnings is, like, don't try and reinvent everything. Pick the things that matter most to your market, that makes you unique, and that's going to be your superpower, and then do everything else like by the book. Like, don't try and over innovate. And I think customer success is one of those things that I'd say is, like, there's such a well-proven approach to doing it. Buy the book and do it.
Wonderful.
Unless you're building a customer success technology, then you might want to rewrite the book. So, but there are companies out there doing that.
And earlier in the talk, you talked about kind of paraphrasing, almost be leery of customers that'll kind of pull you off your path.
Yeah.
It'd be great to hear a little bit more about kind of when you put that in the context of as you were going international and into the U.S., kind of how did you adapt through some of those things? Yeah,
I mean, I think the biggest thing that pulled us off course is we had built a really powerful data platform. We're data engineers and product people at the end of the day. At Google, we built some really crazy big data systems for the AdWords platform, Google Analytics. And what we wanted to do is kind of apply big data principles into e-commerce. And as a result of that, our heritage and heart was in big data systems and doing stuff around that. But ultimately, the purpose of our big data system and was to drive, better, increase transactions. You get more know your customer better, drive more transactions. So when we went off course, it was because the customer was like, we love big data systems. And we'd be like, we love big data systems. And we kind of were like, and they'd be like, well, we really want an analytics platform. We want a real-time analytics platform. We're like, yeah, that's kind of like a derivative of our platform. But we'll pay you a lot of money to build that. And we'll pay you a lot to build this real-time analytics platform for us. And we just found ourselves like sucked into that. And
the temptation.
The temptation. It was Gollum. It was like, the temptation of building a pure big data system. And it's like, frankly, we should have pivoted. If that was where we felt like our heart was and their customer was, then we should have pivoted into that and stayed true to that. But we tried to do both. And we tried to find a way to explain that we're a personalization technology, we're a customer experience technology, we're an analytics technology. And we ended up at one point, I feel like the platform ended up as like 10 SaaS companies in one. And it was just not possible to be great at all those 10 things. And so I think what you do is you lie to yourself in terms of, we can do it, and we can do it for this reason, and it makes sense to do it this way. And this is, I think, a pitfall of building a new category, is you're like, because we're building a new category. And a new category will have these things all under one roof. And Adobe is wrong because it's a Frankenstein of different technologies, and we're building it from the ground up. And so you need to, that was a trap. And I think we validated it by selling to these deals to these big customers. And they all asked for variations on the big data systems.
And, speaking of kind of building a new category, did you find when you were going to the US that there was more resistance, less, or kind of the same as far as how Qubit was received from hey, we're building a new category?
Yeah. So first of all the really big deals we did were in America. There was a lot of that interest in the States. So they were really up for that kind of co-development type approach. It's almost like big corporations will want to co-develop with a bunch of smart teams that can kind of tailor the roadmap to them. I mean, if you look at it super cynically, if you've got a lot of VC funding, you're operating at really negative margins, and they're kind of sucking that out of you in a sense. I mean, if that's the really cynical way I kind of have looked at it. But ultimately, I found the U.S. market was really open to that co-development of product, and way more than the UK market. The UK market was more like, yeah, we'll take what you say we should use here. And then paradoxically, the US market, outside of that, they want the cookie cutter product. Most of the market wants the cookie cutter, out of the box, user-centric product. And you're way better off focusing on that space than you are on the big deal co-development stuff.
Would you say to a degree that it's almost meeting people where they're at? As far as like the cookie cutter?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the best thing you can do is you put it up. Jessica Livingston said it. The best thing you can do is find a real problem that there's a underserved. This is a Mark Organ concept. Mark speaks at SaaStock. He's a great speaker. Find the underserved hero user. There are people in these organizations that are fully loaded with responsibility. They don't have great solutions. They have real problems. Find those users, build a solution for them, and then build from there. That is just such a powerful technique. We've done a lot of that now, and it's been a dramatic shift in the way we develop and we serve our customer. And so I think you're better off that path than anything else.
I think that's a good segue to one last question from me before we turn it over to the rest of the group. So perhaps a parting shot for, I guess, some advice for those that do have global ambitions, maybe just something that you want to leave them with.
Well, I think the biggest question is, do you go US or Europe? Being a UK, so is everybody UK here? Yeah, so the biggest question is you from the UK. The UK market is a phenomenal market, firstly. Like, it's a really amazing market here because we're a relatively small country that has a good GDP and has a strong willingness to buy technology. And I found, in e-commerce, it's the highest spend per capita in the world is London. I mean, I don't know if, I think it still reigns that. So the UK market is a great market to build in, but it's, US is 5 times the size. So the question is, do you go to Europe or do you go to the US next? Because there are advantages of going to Europe because it's close, it's culturally, the Americans really struggle to go into Europe. So if you can actually tackle Europe from the UK, you can get ahead of the American competitors that want to go into Europe. And so there's an advantage there. But at the same time, every country is culturally very different. There's different contracts, there's different law, so you're dealing with a lot of that complexity. So that way, sometimes the US is easier. But you really have to ask yourself, where does your product scale the fastest? Where do you sort of see the least friction, the biggest gap in the market? And if you can really kind of lay that up, then you figure out which way to go, Europe or the US. And we ended up figuring out that we probably would have been better off going to Europe before America, because we ended up, after we did this customer segmentation, we realized that we worked really well with big global luxury fashion businesses. And Philippe's in the back who looks after that. And he, what we found is that, LVMH and Chanel and all these companies were, in cities in Europe. We could have gone in, worked with those companies and built a very strong base in Europe and then gone into America even stronger. And I think that, so it's like really customer segmentation, ideal customer, your product, really playing that strategically out. You might find that Europe is better than the US first, and you definitely get an advantage going to Europe over the States.
Okay, great. Thank you.